Vladimir Putin hasn't said much about Ukraine peace talks recently, but Donald Trump is giving regular updates, with his team heading to Moscow next week.
They're going to keep talking. They're talking to Russia now. Steve Witkoff is going over, maybe with Jared. I'm not sure about Jared going, but he's involved in the process, smart guy, and they're going to be meeting with President Putin, I believe, next week in Moscow.
The man going to the Kremlin once more, Steve Witkoff, Trump golf buddy, businessman and special envoy. He returns to Moscow as his diplomatic dealings are being called into question because Bloomberg released a transcript of a phone call between Witkoff and Putin's top foreign policy advisor, which reveals the origins of the initial 28-point peace plan, which was criticized for being too pro-Russian. In the conversation from October the 14th, Witkoff appears to prep Yuri Ushakov on how to get Putin to sweet-talk Trump, saying he should congratulate the US president on the Gaza peace deal and that you respect that he is a man of peace. Ushakov replies, I agree with you that he will congratulate. He will say that Mr. Trump is a real peace man and so and so. Witkoff then says they should come up with a 20-point plan similar to the one in Gaza, stating, now, me to you, I know what it's going to take to get a peace deal done. Donetsk and maybe a land swap somewhere. Witkoff seems to think this is a simple land deal. Give Russia the entire Donetsk region. But it's not that straightforward. Russia doesn't control all of Donetsk, even as they release footage of them in Pokrovsk, claiming they've nearly taken the entire town. The Ukrainians are still present there too and continue to counter-attack. Kyiv and its allies are clear about any peace deal. Borders cannot be changed by force. The man from the phone call, Yuri Ushakov, said today that the latest proposal needed serious analysis in Moscow, and he was asked why someone would have leaked his conversation with Witkoff. He said it was unlikely that whoever did it did so to improve Russia and US relations. The president himself said the phone call simply showed standard negotiation practice.
That's what a deal maker does. You got to say, look, they want this, you've got to convince them with this. You know, that's a very standard form of negotiation.
So you're not worried that he's too pro-Russian?
No, I think, look, this war could go on for years, and Russia's got a lot more people, got a lot more soldiers, you know.
Decisions about Ukraine must include Ukraine.
As the Americans and Russians prepare for a tete-a-tete in Moscow, Ukraine and the Europeans tried to make themselves heard. President Zelenskyy spoke to the coalition of the willing yesterday. He's backed a revised deal that was brokered between Ukraine and US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, which ensured that Ukraine would keep a sizable army after the war and not take NATO membership off the table.
Розраховую на подальшу активну співпрацю з американською стороною та з президентом Трампом. Багато залежить від Америки, бо саме на американську силу в Росії зважають найбільше.
Zelenskyy wants to meet Trump to finalise that plan. Will that happen before the Moscow meeting? And why is Rubio not heading to the Kremlin with Witkoff and Jared Kushner? Amidst the back and forth of diplomacy, the war grinds on. Another drone strike in Zaporizhia, injuring 12 people. As politicians debate the pros and cons of bullet points on paper, residents here have differing takes. As Yulia clutches her cat outside her burning building, she says the peace plan doesn't look like much. Do you believe in peace, she's asked? No. If I let myself believe that, then peace will come at a very high cost, the cost of our lives. But Victor has a different take. The drone strike broke the windows inside his apartment as he, his wife and daughter slept. When asked about the talks, he said, better such a peace plan than a continuation of what we have seen and heard today. Better a bad peace than a good war. Well, I'm joined now by William B. Taylor, who was the US ambassador to Ukraine under Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama. Firstly, Ambassador, what do you make of this phone call?
I think it's interesting to see the interaction between Steve Witkoff and Ushakov. So it is an insight into that relationship. It's not really a surprise. We know that Steve Witkoff has spent a lot of time in the Kremlin, and we also know that that he has developed that kind of relationship with the Russians. We also know that he hasn't spent any time in Kyiv. So it's not a unbalanced, it's not a balanced relationship there. But it's an interesting insight into that relationship.
And I guess, as you say, it's not really that surprising that Witkoff has this relationship with Ushakov. He himself, Witkoff, has praised Vladimir Putin before on Tucker Carlson's podcast a few months ago. The interesting thing, though, is that he seems to think that a peace deal is simple. You just give Russia Donetsk. I mean, I wonder what you make of his thinking when it comes to that.
It's clear from that that he doesn't understand the other side. He doesn't understand the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians will not give up territory. They will never give up legal claim to Donetsk and Luhansk and Crimea. They will not give it up. They may acknowledge, Ukrainians may acknowledge that the Russians illegally occupy that 19% of the Ukrainian territory. They may acknowledge that. That's a fact. But they won't give up claim to it, legal claim to it. So it demonstrates that it demonstrates a misunderstanding of where the Ukrainians are.
And I guess, does it also show something interesting going on here, that Ukraine seems to be at the heart of factions within the White House? You've got Witkoff and Jared Kushner heading to Moscow next week. You've then got Mr. Driscoll, who is at the Defense Department and is a close ally of J.D. Vance. And then you have Marco Rubio. It seems to be that there's these factions emerging with Ukraine right in the middle of it all.
That was probably the case up until last weekend, when Marco Rubio seemed to kind of take back control of this process, because there was a divergence between these two. And we saw the divergence in that 28-point plan, which may have had the beginnings. We may have seen the origins of that in this Witkoff phone call with Ushakov. And the 28-point plan, of course, was so clearly Russian and pro-Russian. And Rubio then, last weekend, stepped in and said, no, we actually have to take into account the Ukrainian view, and we have to take into account the European view. And so that led to a more balanced plan, the 19-point plan, that has emerged. And so I'm assuming that Witkoff, when he goes to the Kremlin this week or next, and Driscoll, when he goes to Ukraine this week or next, will take this 19-point plan that's basically agreed with the Ukrainians and the Europeans, and that will be the basis of the conversation.
And are the Europeans on the back foot here, though? I mean, what do they need to do, given the fact that, they aren't really involved in these conversations? Do they need themselves to reach out to Moscow?
No, I don't think they need to reach out to Moscow. I think they need to be in sync with, coordinated with, in communication with the Americans and the Ukrainians, which seems to be the case right now. Again, this new 19-point plan has the input of the Europeans. Rubio sat down at some length with the Europeans for their input into this plan, and the Ukrainians. And it's now got the support of, as I say, the Ukrainians, Americans, and Europeans. That's the right proposal. That's the right proposal. It's a more balanced plan. There's still some issues to be discussed between Zelenskyy and Trump, or between the Ukrainians and the Americans. But that's the right point. Now, the Europeans have stepped up. Europeans are taking the lead in the support for Ukraine, for this coalition of the willing that will provide security for Ukraine once an agreement is reached. So the Europeans are stepping forward, and if they can get this 300 billion or 180 billion euro plan to get the Russian central bank assets out of Euroclear in Belgium, that will also improve and enhance the situation with regard to the Europeans.
But I mean, amidst all of this, one person who hasn't really said much in the last few days is Vladimir Putin. What do you make of the fact that he hasn't really said much?
Vladimir Putin doesn't want this deal. Vladimir Putin is not interested in stopping the war. Vladimir Putin wants one thing. He wants to dominate Ukraine. He wants to eliminate Ukraine, dominate Ukraine, make it into a Belarus. So Vladimir Putin has been very clear about his intentions. And he's not interested in a compromise. He's not interested in negotiations. He's not interested in a ceasefire.